All right, we're back. So, today is day 2 and 3 of learning Spanish and talking about my process and drawing upon what I covered in the previous video. Um, Yesterday, of course, um, I was supposed to make a video. That's why today is day 2 and 3 because I'm making up for what I missed out on yesterday, and it's quite ironic because I started these videos to be consistent, and here I am fucking up on day 2. But but shit happens, such is life, you know. Obviously, I tried to make a video on day 2, but I was extremely busy and I couldn't actually get it done. So of course, we have to justify that by doing twice as much work today. So that's just fucking what happens. Um, there's some people actually interacting with the first video, which is interesting because I didn't actually expect that at all because I'm sort of doing it for myself. Um, But for that reason, because people are interacting, I'm going to make it very, very transparent about what I'm actually going to do, how I'm going to improve, um, and everything I've sort of learnt. Anyway, just cover a bunch of random shit. So pretty much, I wrote some stuff down. So I did exactly what I said I was going to do on day 1. It's very difficult to see because of the terrible lighting that I have in this room. But pretty much, I've gone on Link, which is a paid subscription, and I've used the mini story number 1, about Miguel, who's a chef, and I've written it down in Spanish. And underneath all my written translations, sorry, underneath the Spanish writing that I've done, I've written the translations for each word in English. Now, I want to make that clear. It's the translations for each word, it's not the translations for the sentence. Because if you write a sentence in Spanish, or in any language for that matter, and then you write the translation in English of the translation of the sentence, then you're not going to allow your brain to get used to the grammar. So I'll give you an example. What I've written down here, it says, Miguel se levanta a las 6 todas las mañanas. Fantastic. Oh no, fucking good. So instead of writing, actually an actual correct translation of that in English, I've said Miguel himself gets up at the 6 every the morning. Obviously, that's grammatically completely incorrect. But the whole point of me doing that is to get my brain used to the grammar of Spanish. And I found this particularly helpful when I was learning Chinese. I would write the translations of all the characters, and then I would sort of use my brain to try and figure out the meaning of the sentence and figure out my own translation through just the definitions, the English definitions of the words. Yeah. So yeah, that is something I would absolutely recommend for someone learning a language. I found it very, very helpful when I was doing Chinese. Write the definitions of the words, don't write the translations of the sentence, because you need to get used to the way that the ideas come out of the brain of a Spanish speaker, for example. It doesn't come out in English. It comes out um, comes out in Spanish grammatical patterns, and you have to get used to that. Anyway, I'm talking a bunch of shit. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do exactly the same thing, pretty much. We're at the early stages of learning, so we're going to be doing pretty much the same thing for a considerable period of time. But there's always new things to talk about, about this sort of stuff. So I'm going to be writing the second and third stories. So yeah, pretty much twice as much work as I did on the first time. The second and third stories, they'll be about different stuff and just using the exact same method that I described earlier. So it's going to be as simple as that. That's what I'm going to do. Um, I would also like to make it transparent about. I did watch a couple of videos explaining some Spanish pronunciation. However, I've not directed pretty much really any thought to it, really any dedicated attention to it. I've just sort of watched a couple just to give my brain some context. It's relatively easy compared to using Chinese. It doesn't have tones, etc. So yeah, in that sense, it's not so hard. However, obviously there are hard aspects of the pronunciation of Spanish, but I'm not really prioritizing that right now. I'm prioritizing learning a fuck ton of words, and then getting all the words, learning a bunch of words, and then looking at the relationship that the words have within each other. That's I think it's a superior method than learning a bunch of grammatical fucking rules and then trying to conjure up some words because you've been focusing so much on the grammar, you don't even know any words, and then you're trying to use them in a sentence. Like, no, forget all that shit. learn a shit ton of words, and then find the relationships that the words have with between each other. That is the best way you're going to learn grammar, you know, in my opinion. I think it's the most stimulating, it's the best way to learn it. Um, and it's also fun. It keeps the process interesting. So that's the best way to do it. I really do think so. Well, I did find out that when I was learning Chinese, it was a very sort of, I sort of looked at it generally in a very broad sense in three different steps. It was reading, so learning how to read, learning a bunch of words, essentially vocabulary, reading. Because if you can read and you know the pronunciation and you can read, then you can listen. And if you can listen, and if you listen a bunch of times and you hear people saying shit, and you listen, you remember that, and that gives you the ability to speak. So generally speaking, it does fall within that pattern: reading, listening, then speaking. But obviously, those areas of there's a little bit of overlap between those periods. It's not so it's not so straightforward. You know, there is definitely a little bit of overlap there. But I'll get into that in some other videos and stuff. But yep, that's me just being transparent. I did watch a couple of videos on pronunciation, although my pronunciation's terrible. But yeah, I'm prioritizing learning a bunch of words, learning the relationship between those words. So yep, I've pretty much told you what I'm going to do and what I have done. Um, that's it. I'm going to respond to a bunch of comments. Feel free to interact with these sorts of things. Like, this is a very serious environment for getting towards our goal, and my goal of learning Spanish. So we're going to get it done. And yeah, simple as that. Cheers, guys.